Welcome back, TV spoilers. Billy Abbott believed he had finally learned how to speak the language of peace, or at least how to sound convincing enough to pass as someone who had made that choice. Standing beside Sally Spectra, he convinced himself that love could be a stabilizing force, that devotion might finally quiet the restless noise that had always lived inside him. He promised her that revenge no longer defined him, that the long shadows cast by Victor Newman and Cain Ashby would no longer dictate his decisions. To Sally, his words felt sincere, carefully shaped by vulnerability and regret. To Billy, they felt like a necessary Leone he told, not just to protect her, but to protect the part of himself that was still burning with unfinished business. On the surface, he redirected his energy toward Abbott Communications, presenting new initiatives as bold business expansions, framed in language that spoke of innovation, growth, and legitimacy. Yet beneath that polished exterior, every move carried a secondary purpose, a darker intent carefully buried under layers of plausible deniability. Billy's resentment had not faded, it had merely evolved. Time had not erased the humiliations, the power plays, the sense of being perpetually outmaneuvered by men who thrived on domination and control. Victor Newman had always represented the embodiment of unchecked power, a figure who bent others to his will without consequence. Cain Ashby, in Billy's mind, symbolized a different kind of threat, someone who wore respectability like armor, while quietly positioning himself to seize influence. Billy convinced himself that his covert plan was not reckless but strategic, not emotional but calculated. By channeling resources through Abbott Communications, he believed he could strike without exposing himself, delivering consequences under the guise of corporate maneuvering. What he refused to acknowledge was how deeply personal the mission remained, how each step forward was fueled not by logic, but by a need to reclaim a sense of control he had never truly possessed. Sally, at first, embraced the calm she believed Billy had chosen. She wanted to trust the version of him who spoke about stability and commitment, who claimed he was done chasing ghosts from old battles. Yet something about his presence began to shift. It was subtle at first, moments of distraction, conversations that ended abruptly, a tension beneath his confidence that felt too familiar to ignore. Sally had built her life navigating ambition and risk, and she recognized the signs of someone living to parallel realities. Billy's assurances began to feel rehearsed, his affection genuine yet overshadowed by an invisible weight he refused to share. She told herself she was overthinking, that scars from past betrayals were coloring her perception. Still, unease settled in her chest, persistent and unresolved. As days passed, the inconsistencies grew harder to dismiss. Billy's schedule became unpredictable, punctuated by meetings that lacked clear explanations and phone calls he took in isolation. Abbott Communications, once a shared point of excitement, transformed into a shield behind which he hid. Sally noticed the way he guarded his devices, the way his focus sharpened whenever certain names surfaced in conversation. She did not confront him immediately, not because she lacked courage, but because she feared the answer. Sally understood too well what it meant to love someone driven by obsession, and she was terrified that Billy had never truly left that cycle behind. The promise he made to her echoed in her mind, now less like a vow and more like a fragile construct at risk of collapse. Her suspicions pushed her into quiet observation rather than confrontation. Sally watched patterns emerge, connecting fragments Billy never intended her to see. She noticed the alignment between Abbott Communications' strategic decisions and the vulnerabilities of those Billy claimed he no longer cared about. What initially appeared as coincidence began to resemble intent. Each discovery chipped away at the trust she had fought so hard to rebuild, not just with Billy, but with herself. She questioned whether she had been naive to believe that love alone could undo years of resentment and ambition. The realization that Billy might be exploiting both his company and their relationship to pursue vengeance cut deeper than anger. It ignited a profound sense of betrayal. When Sally finally uncovered undeniable evidence of Billy's covert agenda, the truth landed with devastating clarity. The documents, the timelines, the calculated positioning all pointed to a plan meticulously designed to inflict damage, while preserving plausible innocence. There was no room left for doubt, no comforting narrative she could cling to. The man who had promised her devotion had chosen deception instead, and the realization shattered the fragile equilibrium they had built. Sally did not feel blindsided so much as deeply wounded by the knowledge that Billy believed she could not handle the truth. His silence became louder than any confession. a statement that revenge still mattered more than honesty. The confrontation, when it came, was inevitable, though it carried none of the explosive drama Sally had once imagined. It unfolded with quiet intensity, heavy with everything left unsaid. Billy's inability to deny the truth forced him into a reckoning he had delayed for too long. As he acknowledged his actions, the weight of his choices settled heavily between them. He spoke of strategy and necessity of protecting what he had built. But beneath his explanations lay the raw truth he could no longer escape. Revenge still defined him, shaping his decisions even as he claimed to have moved on. Sally listened not with fury, but with a sorrow that cut deeper than anger ever could. Sally's demand was not impulsive, it was born from clarity. She understood that love without trust was unsustainable, that standing beside Billy while he waged a secret war would eventually destroy them both. She did not ask him to abandon his ambition, only to choose transparency and restraint over obsession. Her ultimatum forced Billy to confront the reality of his divided loyalties. The path he walked promised power and vindication, but it also threatened to erode everything meaningful in his life. Abbott Communications, once a symbol of reinvention, now stood at the center of a moral crossroads. Its future tethered to Billy's ability or inability to let go. Billy's internal conflict reached a breaking point. He weighed the intoxicating pull of revenge against the grounding presence of Sally's love, aware that choosing one would irrevocably alter the other. His identity had long been shaped by reaction, by defiance against those who underestimated or controlled him. To step away from that cycle felt less like surrender and more like erasure. Yet the cost of continuing was no longer abstract. It stood before him in the form of a woman who refused to be collateral damage. Billy recognized that whatever decision he made would leave a mark, not just on his relationship, but on the legacy he was building. As the tension lingered unresolved, the future of Billy and Sally's relationship remained uncertain, suspended between intention and action. Abbott Communications, too, hovered in a precarious balance, its direction dependent on whether Billy would finally align his promises with his behavior. Sally did not retreat, but she did not offer reassurance either, choosing instead to wait and watch, aware that clarity often emerged only after silence. Billy stood at the edge of transformation or repetition, uncertain which version of himself would prevail. And in that quiet uncertainty, nothing truly ended because some choices, once delayed too long, have a way of deciding themselves. For years, loyalty had been the quiet foundation of Nikki Newman's life, a principle she defended even when it demanded personal sacrifice. She stood beside Victor Newman through countless wars, public humiliations, and moral compromises, convincing herself that endurance was the same as strength. Yet endurance has limits, and over time, the cost of remaining silent began to erode something fundamental within her. The manipulations, once justified as necessary evils, became patterns she could no longer ignore. Nikki reached a moment of clarity not through a single betrayal, but through the cumulative weight of every scheme Victor had orchestrated, while expecting her unwavering support. The realization that she had become complicit in sustaining his unchecked power forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. Loyalty without integrity had transformed her into a prisoner of her own marriage. Victor, meanwhile, remained convinced that control was synonymous with security. His authority at Newman Enterprises had always depended on information, leverage, and intimidation, tools he wielded with ruthless precision. He believed his marriage to Nikki was unbreakable, anchored not just by love but by shared history and mutual survival. In his mind, Nikki's presence was proof that no matter how far he pushed, she would never abandon him. That assumption became his greatest blind spot. While Victor continued to fortify his position, he failed to notice the growing distance between the woman he trusted most and the empire. He refused to soften for her sake. Nikki's disillusionment did not immediately translate into rebellion. At first, it manifested as quiet withdrawal, a growing refusal to rationalize Victor's behavior. She recognized how his manipulation extended beyond boardrooms and into personal lives, reshaping destinies without consent. Each new maneuver chipped away at her resolve until she understood that remaining by his side meant endorsing a system built on fear and dominance. The question that haunted her was no longer whether Victor loved her, but whether love could exist in a space where empathy was consistently sacrificed for power. That internal reckoning led Nikki to a decision she once believed unthinkable: stepping directly into opposition. Jack Abbott had long stood as Victor's ideological opposite, a rival shaped as much by principle as by ambition. Their battles were legendary, defined by contrasting philosophies rather than mere corporate competition. Where Victor believed in absolute control, Jack valued reinvention and transparency, even when those ideals cost him dearly. Nikki recognized that aligning with Jack was not simply an act of revenge against Victor, but a strategic choice rooted in conscience. Approaching Jack meant crossing a line that could never be erased, but it also offered a path toward accountability. In Jack, Nikki saw an opportunity to expose truths that had been buried beneath Victor's carefully constructed narratives. The alliance formed quietly, built on mutual understanding rather than sentiment. Nikki brought with her an intimate knowledge of Victor's methods, insights earned through years of proximity to his inner circle. She understood the vulnerabilities hidden behind his public confidence, the financial maneuvers designed to obscure risk, and the personal weaknesses he masked with intimidation. Providing Jack with this information was not an impulsive betrayal, but a deliberate act of responsibility. Nikki accepted that her actions would dismantle the illusion of unity she and Victor had presented to Genoa City. Yet she believed that illusion had already become a lie too heavy to sustain. Jack used the information with precision, recognizing that exposure, not spectacle, would inflict the greatest damage. As details surfaced, Newman Enterprises descended into turmoil, shaken by revelations that undermined Victor's authority from within. The chaos was not merely financial, it was psychological. Victor thrived on certainty, and uncertainty threatened the very foundation of his power. Each uncovered truth weakened his grip, transforming the empire he built into a battlefield where loyalty fractured and trust evaporated. Jack did not need to defeat Victor outright. He only needed to destabilize the myth of invincibility that had protected him for decades. Victor's discovery of Nikki's role in his unraveling ignited a fury, unlike anything he had previously unleashed. To him, this was not a strategic loss but a deeply personal betrayal. Nikki had been more than a partner, she was a witness to his rise, a symbol of continuity in a life defined by conflict. Her decision to stand against him shattered the narrative he told himself about control and devotion. The confrontations that followed were charged with unresolved history, every shared memory now reframed as evidence of deception. Victor's rage was fueled by disbelief as much as anger. Unable to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the force dismantling his empire, Nikki's choice to file for divorce transformed private conflict into public reckoning. Genoa City watched as the collapse of one of its most powerful marriages mirrored the instability spreading through Newman Enterprises. The divorce was not framed as an act of vengeance, but as a declaration of autonomy. Nikki refused to shield Victor any longer, openly acknowledging her reasons for aligning with Jack. In doing so, she dismantled the final barrier protecting Victor from the consequences of his actions. The loss of Nikki's support reverberated through every aspect of his life, exposing vulnerabilities he had long denied. For Nikki, the aftermath was complex and unrelenting. Liberation did not arrive as relief, but as a sober awareness of what her freedom demanded. She faced criticism, suspicion, and the weight of knowing she had altered the balance of power in Genoa City. Yet beneath the external consequences, Nikki felt a renewed sense of self, grounded in the knowledge that she had chosen integrity over comfort. Her alliance with Jack solidified, not as a romantic entanglement, but as a shared commitment to challenging Victor's dominance. Together, they represented a shift in the city's power structure, one defined less by fear and more by exposure. The future of Newman Enterprises grew increasingly uncertain, its stability threatened by the erosion of Victor's authority. Abbott, too, stood at a crossroads, strengthened by new leverage yet vulnerable to retaliation. The conflict between the two empires evolved beyond rivalry, becoming a broader struggle over influence and legacy. Victor, cornered yet unbroken, began recalculating his next move, driven by a refusal to accept defeat. Nikki, aware that her decision had only begun a larger war, remained resolute but vigilant, understanding that transformation often provokes its own dangers. As alliances shifted and long-standing structures weakened, Genoa City entered a period of uneasy anticipation. Nothing felt resolved, only rearranged, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Nikki's break from Victor marked an end to one chapter, but the consequences of that rupture had yet to fully unfold. Power rarely disappears, it adapts, waiting for the moment to reassert itself. And somewhere between certainty and doubt, the future lingered unresolved, shaped not by what had already been revealed, but by what remained hidden just beneath the surface. On our TV Spoilers channel, I'm always looking for content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.